Good afternoon. My name is Tom Singer. This is Concert Cues. We're pre-recording them these days. We used to do them in the concert hall, but now we get to do them in advance, which gives me the chance to introduce you to Carrie Krause before the concert. And I'm glad to do that. Carrie, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, and right now you're in Bozeman, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And you're one heck of a busy musician in Bozeman. You got a lot of groups going over there.
There's a lot of good opportunities here. I'm concertmaster of the symphony. And a few years ago, I started a nonprofit series called Baroque Music Montana. And we do a number of different sorts of things, but we travel around the state and play mostly in small settings for which the music was intended. And it gives me a chance to interact with local musicians that are wonderful, as well as bringing in people that specialize in Baroque music from across the country to learn from and be inspired by and to share with audiences here. So that's been a way to make all of my dreams come true. It's been great fun.
I don't remember seeing that group show up in Billings. Have I just been out of touch?
We oftentimes play, as I mentioned, we play in smaller settings. So we have played a lot in Shepherd at an
Hmm.
amazing house, the home of Bruce and Ann Kanya. Um,
Mm,
and we play in
good,
Columbus.
good friends of ours. Yes,
Oh,
Bruce
good.
and Anna. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're wonderful and so fun. And then we play in Columbus at a church. We played in the park on the hottest day of the summer this past year. And that's thanks to Kathleen Ralph, who's an amazing arts organi- organizer in Columbus. And then we've also played a fair amount in Red Lodge. Um, Thanks to Gerald Davidson and Mitzi Borachik out there.
Oh,
So, and we've just made a bunch of friends in those smaller towns. So it's nice to take a small chamber ensemble and play in small settings.
yeah. No, it's great fun. I'm I need to make closer friends with some of the people you've mentioned. Obviously, I understand you got some connections to Billings and this area, um, even though you were born in faraway place. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I grew up primarily in Fairbanks, Alaska, which randomly was a good place to be a young musician. There was really fine teaching, and there's a lot of us that are running around as professional musicians, believe it or not, from Fairbanks. It's pretty random, but it was a very vibrant environment to grow up in. But my parents are from the Billings area, and my dad grew up in Lavina. Um, and his mom, my grandmother, grew up in a sod cabin with her many siblings. Her parents homesteaded in the Harleton area. So I have many relatives there. When I, as a kid, I felt like I was related to everybody in Lavina. And then my mom grew up right in Billings, and she did her music teacher training with Stephen Payne, who taught in the
Sure.
high schools for many years.
Many
And
years. Yes.
yeah, and so I've been coming to Billings, even though my dad was in the Army and we lived a number of places before we went to Alaska. I've been coming to Billings and to Montana my whole life, and it's always been a really beloved place. And when it came time for me to figure out where I was going to live, the idea of living in Montana just seemed beyond my wildest dreams. It seemed so like such a wonderful um, thing to be able to do because I wanted a good quality of life, which I think is pretty unusual for musicians that are really, going for it with their career. Um,
Well,
but it's
you've managed to develop a robust professional career with engagements all over the country and the world from your headquarters in Bozeman. So that's pretty spectacular.
well, part of it is being a fish in the pond in Baroque music because it's such a specialty playing on period instruments and being steeped in historical style. There's a finite number of people that do that, and so we tend to move around a lot and see each other, in corners of the country, and that's afforded a lot of wonderful opportunities. I played a lot in Atlanta when I first moved to Bozeman, and got a lot of experience playing concertos and playing in various festivals and going to Europe and things, and other groups through the years too have allowed me to stay well connected to the scene and to other
Mm.
professional players.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always can continue to learn and grow.
So are you staying connected now via Zoom with those folks?
Well, it's yeah, I mean, they're my best friends, are musicians that I get to work with, which feels so lucky. Many of them have had babies this year because it took a pandemic for that to be possible for musicians, for them to be in one place.
Mhm.
It's been really tough for a lot of them, to have very little to no work. Um, I I've been able to remain very busy actually here, and I have a number of pretty giant projects going this four seasons, with the Billings Symphony being one of them, that
Mm.
have kept me very engaged, um, with my work time.
So
But I miss my friends greatly, and I really look forward to when we can be together again.
yeah, there's a lot of that feeling around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the piece you're playing, the Four Seasons. Um, have you played this before? What's your experience with it?
I have. When I was in high school, our orchestra director up in Fairbanks had the brilliant idea to showcase a number. As I mentioned, there was a number of us good players when I was growing up. And so we were each assigned a season, that was going to be showcased on this concert. And one of the other violinists came up with a fever that day. And so the director said, Carrie, can you learn summer to play tonight? And I was like, okay. And I think I gave myself a fever. I was like, in such a frenzy. Um, to
Did you have to memorize it, or you just had to learn it so you could
no,
play it?
I didn't play it from memory.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of notes in summer.
Hmm. There's a, I was listening to it, like, reminding myself about it, and I thought, these people who accused Mozart of having too many notes. I mean, there's a lot of notes in
Oh,
Vivaldi, and uh, just a lot of notes.
yeah, there's a lot of fast playing. I would
Yeah.
say that's definitely a hallmark of the Italian style of Baroque violin playing. Lots of notes, virtuosity. But I also was able to play. Let's see, I did the Four Seasons. I've done them in Bozeman a couple of times, just organizing them with one on a part orchestra, with colleagues here. Because they're such beloved, wonderful pieces. And
Yeah.
I also um, was asked to guest direct Seattle Baroque, with the Four Seasons. That was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. Um, and I have to say that I did a similar sort of interview as we're doing right now. And I was in New York at the time. And so I had to go and record it from Carnegie Hall. That was where the microphone was available. You're giving me a nice flashback.
That's great. That's great. I I'd love to be in Carnegie Hall right now. It'd be more fun, but what the heck. Um, so what's special about the piece to you?
Well, the Four Seasons are one of the first programmatic pieces ever written. So Vivaldi based them on these sonnets, and actually into the music he wrote, this is the birds, lightning, thunder. So there's these very pictorial elements that then, as a violinist, you figure out how to make that sound on your instrument, or how to tell the story of these peasants, or this shepherd boy. Um, and so it's always a mix of like taking Vivaldi's word at face value, but then also putting your own um, take on it too, and um, kind of pushing the envelope with what the story is. These pieces are played so often, sometimes sitting in the orchestra. I'll play them like 7 times a season, with
Hmm.
all different violin soloists. And every time we do it is completely different and fascinating. And so I'm never bored with them because there's just so much room to take Vivaldi's inspiration, in new directions to try to get closer to what he maybe had in mind or what is, really personal and really convincing to you and makes sense for that particular moment and that particular group of people that you're playing for.
So have you worked with Anne before, Anne Harrigan?
I I came and played with the Billings Symphony and stayed with my grandparents many years ago. And then she's also filled in with the Bozeman Symphony, I think, for a
Hmm.
Halloween concert. But not a lot. And I'm very much looking forward to her. We've had a number of nice conversations and interactions, and I have a lot of friends in the orchestra as well. So it's going to be it's just really been something I've been looking forward to for these months, a chance to play music together.
And so what what do you expect to be different about this particular performance after talking to Anne about it? And I know you're not in your final rehearsals yet, but um, what's going to be different in your mind?
Well, the fact that it's broadcast, and not for live orchestra, and so trying to sort of put yourself in that mindset and doing sort of some creating that picture, and preparing because as a musician, you oftentimes you're playing, visualizing the hall, visualizing all these people and how you're going to feel. So that's been a new thing is kind of visualizing what it's going to be like to be performing for a broadcast. Um, Also playing them with modern orchestra in this size of orchestra. I oftentimes do it with a very small group, one on a part or fewer violins on a part. And so that's going to create a different kind of sound. It's going to be really fun to work with the orchestra to explore how far we can go with variety of articulation and specificity of sound. Um, Oftentimes playing these pieces, there's a luxury of a lot of rehearsal time to dive in pretty deep with that because as I mentioned, everyone plays it so differently. It takes a little bit of time to get on board with what that is. So I've been trying to communicate well with the players. I spent hours marking the parts detailed so that they know this note's long, this note's short, go to this note, play this note close to the bridge. So that when we do finally get together on Wednesday, we can be as efficient and productive with our rehearsal time and coming up with a really unified and compelling, unique version of these pieces.
So are the markings that you've put in shared now, are they the same ones or similar to the ones you did when you conducted Seattle Baroque?
Every time I play these pieces, I take completely new parts
Really?
because I'm always changing. And even between the time I marked them and then when I started practicing, I had new ideas. So, so you do have to decide and lock yourself in so that you can be a good orchestral musician, a good ensemble player, and figure out what will work for that group of players.
Right. So, I mean, the orchestra for may be bigger than what you're used to, but it's still a fairly small orchestra in part because of the COVID restrictions, correct?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So this repertoire for this concert is really perfect programming for this set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we knew that we could do it even if we had to make the orchestra smaller.
Right.
So it was smart thinking on the part of Anne to
Yeah.
program this.
Yeah. Okay. We've been saying the word Baroque, and we're not talking about broke, um, the old joke. Uh, but for those who aren't particularly attuned to the differences between classical and romantic and Baroque, what distinguishes Baroque music?
Well, Baroque music was from 1600 to 1750. It started with the birth of opera, which is basically the emancipation of a virtuosic singer to be more expressive and more technically adept. So it saw the explosion of virtuosity and particularly instrumental writing. And then 1750 was the death of Bach. Vivaldi composed these pieces in between 1716 and 1725. So it's kind of the beginning of the high Baroque. And there was vast exploration, instruments, the stringed instruments, wind instruments, they were all just kind of being figured out. And so instrumental writing was very exploratory. And then you get into the classical when things tend to become much more refined and clear and balanced. Tonality was just becoming very solidified from the modal system, major and minor tonality. And so there was this real idea that the key that a piece was in, like, affected you on a physical level, like you couldn't help but have an emotional reaction to a key in F minor, which is the key of winter. Or that, they had to end an instrumental sonata with something that was kind of a easy palate cleanser, which now we want to end with something that, is fiery and gets you, up out of your seat clapping. But back then they thought if you ended like that, my gosh, people would be so riled up, they would just go about punching each other. You had to give them something nice to calm the nerves because you were so sensitive to the passions. And so that was really the point of Baroque music was to move the passions. And there's some really wild things out there, particularly in the 17th century, that we as modern audiences don't hear very often. But if you really get into Baroque music, then there's loads and loads of great stuff.
Well, and so you've intrigued me. I mean, I'm not anywhere near the classical musician you are. I often think about how country western and rock audiences respond to music, the amplification we have now. They're doing the same thing. They're performing the exact same note at the exact same time, theoretically, but probably making the little variations like you're talking about. But yeah, we always end on a big enthusiastic, emotional, screaming kind of thing. Seems like. Why would that disappear? What happened? How did people change?
Oh, well, I think that they had exciting enders in the Baroque period for sure, but there are a lot of there is a lot of really beautiful sublime music as well. I mean, I think that there's just vast variety.
And
But
we're just we've just lost it because we're not because we know what we know and we don't really explore the rest.
Part of it is the instruments. So I often, when I'm playing Baroque music, I'll be playing on a period instrument, which has got strings and a different kind of bow. And I'm actually in the process right now of trying to find a very nice Baroque violin. And so I have a new one actually that just came in the mail about 15 minutes ago. It's still in the box, and I'm going to run up after this and see what it sounds like.
So we've been keeping you from what you hope to be a high experience. That's cool.
Yeah. Yep. It'll be fun to see what that violin has to say. So that's why a lot of the music from the Baroque isn't known today or played as much, as because it doesn't work very well on modern instruments. Also, the scoring of the music is quite plain. Vivaldi, as I mentioned, in the Four Seasons gives you these clues of what the music is about: thunder or a hailstorm or people dancing. But a lot of the music from this time period has very little indications in it, and it has like no dynamics, no articulation, and it was up to the musicians to figure out what to do with it. And I love that. I love that you have to be so creatively invested um, in making music, in saying something, in communicating something from the heart. Um, and a lot of that inspiration comes from learning more about the people who wrote it. You know, what was going on in their life, what was the deal with that country and their patrons, and you know, unique to that particular decade and that particular region. You know, what tragedy had befallen them, you know, or was life good?
No, very interesting. Well, we've used our allotted time. I'll be in trouble if we go much longer. I'm very much looking to what you give, the passion you bring to us on Saturday night. We're excited to have you with us.
Thank you. This has been a great pleasure to speak with you, Tom.
Thank you. Likewise.